yeah, I'm glad that's a good point. Trouble with first. Always in trouble with somebody.
Yeah.
Developer.
We try to make everybody happy.
Has anybody? No. Actually, I was going to ask you. I remember that. And then there was one I was sitting there. So once I knew. Everybody was like this. It was one of the affordable. But you guys do it.
Occasionally. There's still people that aren't happy.
No, I mean,
From there.
I've been, yeah, also was. All right.
Yeah, we just had a hard.
Now I got to start meeting a whole lot more people. I thought I could do this over the summer. It's just been accelerated.
Yeah, I got the website.
So I say hello here because if you do digital targeting, hits per person per household in the areas where we hit at 50 cents a piece. That's $360. But it's got to be just to saturate it. He doesn't hardly ever really chase. He's like a 500,000. No, but he's got big pockets. He's got big pockets.
Hey everyone, thanks for coming. We're going to get started in about 1 minute, so everybody can take their seats. All right, thanks everyone. There is beer in the back. It's cold, so make sure you drink it. I want to welcome everyone. My name is David Edmondson. I am the Executive Director of Austin Tech Alliance. We are a nonprofit that promotes civic engagement in Austin's tech sector. And part of what we do is events like this, which is helping to educate the grassroots of Austin's tech sector on policy issues that impact them and the entire community. Thank you all for coming out to discuss such a meaty topic of CodeNEXT. As I expect most folks in the room know, it is the ongoing revision to Austin's land development code, which zoning regulations that impact everything from where you can build stuff to what you can build. The results of CodeNEXT are going to shape our city for generations, so it's essential for Austin's tech sector to be engaged and an active player in that process. To give you all a quick heads up about this evening's run of show, we're going to hear from Mayor Adler first. Mayor will be followed by the City Planning Director, Greg Guernsey, then John Meeke and Peter Park, who are two consultants working on CodeNEXT for the city. And then we'll finish it up with the panel discussion moderated by Mike Kanan, featuring Andy Cantu, Niran Babalola, David King, and John Michael Cortez. I apologize, John Michael. I had to look down for your name as well. If anyone's going to be tweeting about this evening's event, feel free to use the hashtag CodeNEXT. I checked, there haven't been any recent tweets, so we'll be able to populate the entire channel this evening. Without further ado, I'd like to introduce our first speaker. Mayor Steve Adler was elected Austin's 52nd mayor in December 2014. Along with his brother, he was the first person in his family to graduate from college, completing his undergrad at Princeton before heading to Austin for law school, UT for law school. Like many in this room, he fell in love with Austin and has spent the better part of 4 decades here. Prior to public service, Mayor Adler practiced civil rights and eminent domain law and also served for nearly 10 years as the Chief of Staff and General Counsel for State Senator Elliott Shapley. And that is a damn good job, because I had it also for a couple of years after the mayor left. So, Mayor Adler.
Thanks for the invitation. I always like coming into this space. It's good to get a chance to visit with you all again. And to talk about CodeNEXT is important. I'm not sure there's much that this city is going to do this year that is as important as getting through this process. How many people here are familiar with Imagine Austin document? Just checking in the room. So Imagine Austin is the comprehensive plan that the city has. And it paints a city, a picture of an absolutely wonderful city. It paints a picture of a city that is compact and connected, a city that you can move around in, a city that is walkable, a city that has mixed income and mixed uses throughout the city. It's a city you can move in. It's a city that does not determine health outcomes by which zip code it is that you live in. It's a city that can grow with the population that we have that's growing. We just learned today that we didn't quite pass the 2 million mark in the region last year like we thought we had. It's happening now. That's 2 million people. Austin has about 900,000 in the city limits, fastest growing metropolitan area in the country, has been for the last 5 years. Projected to be that fast growing through the year 2040. Fastest growing metropolitan area. We're growing. And we have to figure out in this vision of a city how we do that and still maintain those things that we want. It's a vision of a city that protects the character of our neighborhoods and as a resource that exists in our city. That's our comprehensive plan. It's a wonderful comprehensive plan. Passed unanimously with a lot of support in the community. The question is, how, from a tactical level, do you get from where we are to that city? Because the city we have right now and the path we're on right now does not deliver us the city that was described in that Imagine Austin comprehensive plan. You look at San Francisco right now. The median home price in San Francisco is $1,150,000. The only people that can afford to live in San Francisco right now are people that are really affluent or people that are subsidized. Boston and Seattle, bound and determined not to follow the path of San Francisco, like a tractor beam, are being pulled in that same direction, with home prices now that are north of $650,000. Gentrification in those cities is rampant. That is the path that we are on as a city. They're losing people and communities and neighborhoods. They're really neat cities, but they're not Austin. They're cities that are now growing into ones that are consumers of art as opposed to cities that are producers of art. So we need a tactical plan that can put us on a different path than the path that we're on right now. If we don't do anything in this city, if we didn't build anything else, if we didn't change any of the rules, we know that we would be a city that would then have $1.5 million 2-bedroom bungalows. We would have gentrification. We would never be able to move around this city. Housing prices would continue to move up 4 times faster than incomes move up, which is what we're having in this city right now. CodeNEXT is the tactical plan that enables us to get from where we are to the vision of the city that we want to be. It's revising our development code. The last time we wrote the development code in this city was 30 years ago. Over the past 30 years, it has been amended almost 200 times, something like that. Most of those amendments have been to resolve individual issues, ad hoc issues that the city has faced. And while they may have been good resolutions for that particular issue, they become part of the code that then applies then universally thereafter, and actually probably in situations that they shouldn't apply in. So we have a challenge in front of us. The development code is the code that decides what buildings look like in our city and where they're built, how they relate to other buildings in the city, where uses are in the city, and how they relate to one another, how they relate to the built environment. It's the code that will in part determine whether or not we have a city that continues to flood. It'll be a code that determines whether or not we can actually have a transit system in this city that can develop and grow with ridership, so we can actually provide people a meaningful and better choice to get out of their cars. This is the document that touches on most everything about the built environment in this city and all aspects of the built environment in this city. It is that important to our city. We could spend the next 5 years working on this. Goodness knows we've already spent the last 3. Or we can say we're going to just focus on this and we're going to get this job done. And that's the goal that the city council has set at this point. 12 months to get this proper process done. A lot of involvement and opportunities for the community to get engaged. Citizens Advisory Group has it right now. Public hearings, people can get involved. It's going to go from them to the sovereign boards, the planning commission, zoning. They're going to have it for 3 or 4 months. A lot of opportunity for people to get engaged. Then it's going to come to the council for 3 or 4 months. A lot of opportunity for the community to get engaged at that point. We have to get this right. I will tell you that there are some things about this that we know. And it begins with the fact that most everybody in this city that knows about this, so we'll go to a smaller segment of the city, most of the people that know about this are people that are scared about this process. And they're scared about this because there's an unknown and they're not sure exactly how this is going to work out. On the one hand, we have many people from neighborhoods that love their neighborhoods and the character and feel in their neighborhoods, and are very concerned that as a result of this process, they're going to lose what it is that is special to them about this city. We also have other people in the city that are concerned that we won't actually do what we need to do to be able to realize the vision of our comprehensive plan. And we're never really going to be able to do something about the affordability issue in this city. We're never going to be able to do what it takes to really make this city different so that it can realize that vision. And I hear that, and my answer to both of those groups is that we really don't have a choice but to do this and to do this right. I have suggested that there are ways that we can take the first initial steps with respect to this process to allay people's worst fears so that the community can come together and do this well. So let me talk about the process that's involved in this plan from getting from here to there. Recognizing that the stakes here are huge and that we have people from lots of different places in the city that are scared and worried about whether or not we're going to be able to make this happen in a way that really works. I would suggest to you that our goal in this process is not to find the perfect answer. I would say that in part because we're never going to get an agreement as to what it is that is the perfect answer. And if we continue to chase the perfect answer, we're not going to be able to get this process done in a way that is really good and serves the city well. I'm speaking here primarily, I think, to a tech group. I know that this is a group that is generally data-driven, and I would say that you are walking into a process that is consensus-driven. And we need to bring the best of both of those worlds to bear. You guys are all about innovation and creativity, and we are all about consensus in the government. You know, we like to talk things out. We like to then talk about them in circles. It's often been said that Austin is blessed to be suffering from terminal democracy. I believe that to be true. It's one of the reasons why I love this city the way that I do. This is not a choice between the right policy or not the right policy. It is a choice between figuring out what is the right policy that represents also the right politics. Because in this city, if it doesn't also represent the right politics, then it doesn't get done. And the best plan that's not done is a plan that is of no value to us. We need to have a plan, and the best plan that we can do to be able to get from where it is we are. So we are entering now into a world, the city council government world. How many people here have ever been to a city council meeting? And I know everyone whose hands got raised. You know, we just had an analysis of our city council meetings. We learned that 45% of our city council meetings is taken up with people talking to the council. Almost half of the accumulated time of council meetings is the council listening to public input. There was one journalist today that tweeted in talking about Austin that we are an 18-hour Simon Says tournament where everyone gets a participation trophy, and I love that. But all this talking has a purpose, and it has to have a purpose in the context of this CodeNEXT plan, because everybody has a different view of what neighborhoods should look like, what should be preserved or not preserved, what it means to be true to the environment, what it really means to be an urbanist or a developer or a neighborhood person, what are the business interests in something associated like this. And frankly, my goal in this process is to help everyone realize the truth, I think, that this is one city, and that ultimately what we are all trying to achieve is very similar, even though we might take different paths to get there. I begin with one of the chief challenges that I think this city faces, and it's affordability. Housing prices going up 4 times faster than incomes is a problem. Following on the same path, heading out to San Francisco is a problem. And I believe we have to do something about supply and demand in this city if we're going to be able to deal with that. That means, I think, if you listen to the experts or our professional staff, that we have to have additional supply in the city to the tune of 135,000 additional units over the next 10 years. So we need a plan that puts us on a path where we can achieve those units, and those units in a place where people actually want to live. We can't build 135,000 units out in Del Valley because not everybody wants to live there. Although I would point out that that is a growing and wonderful community, and everybody should take a look at it. But we need to have a plan that will help us get to that place. In doing that, I recognize that there are neighborhood folks that believe that setting that kind of goal puts at risk their ability to be able to preserve character. And I've told the neighborhoods that I was going to be an advocate for preserving that character, even while at the same time I'm going to be an advocate in seeking the supply that we need. And to the people who want to have the supply in this city, I have said I'm going to be an advocate to ensure that we get to those numbers, recognizing that that means we're going to have to do corridors and city centers in ways differently than we're doing them now. That alone will not be enough to get us to 135,000 units in this city. We're going to have to be concerned with the transition between those two components. But if we are to agree to that base bargain, I think we will have mapped out probably about 90% of the city. That will leave us 5%, 10% of the city that is in those transition areas that are going to be, quite frankly, difficult for us to work our way through. That's the transition between the corridors, the areas of more intense development, and where the neighborhoods are. I am fine with giving the neighborhoods a lot of weight in looking at how those transition areas will look like, so long as the neighborhoods still receive what is the appropriate fair share of the supply of housing that this city needs. They want to go higher, more intense on the corridors, then maybe it doesn't go as far into the neighborhoods. They want something that's more low slung, and maybe a transition goes in farther into the neighborhoods. We have different tools. We need to probably develop more tools but we'll do that according to the process that we're in. So we have laid out a code for everyone to take a look at. It went out in mid-January. It's like 1,100 pages. It's a lot of pages. But for what it is and what it encompasses, not that many pages. But that book is just the rules. It's the dictionary. It's the vocabulary that then gets applied into what things look like actually on our streets. And that involves mapping. What is it that actually happens in places in the city in order to be able to achieve density that happens throughout our city, mixed income opportunities throughout our city? How do you map that out? The maps will come out on April 18th. There's only one thing that we know for sure about those maps. The maps will be wrong. So frankly, I don't need anybody standing up on April 18th and screaming to the heavens, my God, the maps are wrong. Because we know that they're going to be wrong. But what we have to do is we have to work with those maps. My hope is that those maps, when they get laid out, will give us a path to get to the supply of housing that we need in this city, in mixed income, mixed use opportunities, walkable areas, appropriate and contact sensitive, that it will get us the path to 135,000 units. We'll lay out those maps, and then we'll start moving the pieces around the game board. And the one rule that I would like to see us accept is that you can move pieces around the game board, but you can't move any pieces off. I don't want to ever be looking at a map that on its face does not get us to the place where we can actually deal with the serious challenges that we have in the city. And then let's argue or discuss or cajole about how we move those pieces around the board, always keeping them in places where people in fact want to live, so it's reflective of the market. But let's move pieces around and make it work. My hope is that on April 17th, the whole city takes a collective deep breath and rolls up its sleeves, recognizes the plans coming out the next day will not be the final plans, but a place for us to start talking. And then I hope this city finds its better self and recognizes that we are all in this together. We will all get through this process together, and we will exit it together as a community. And as a community, we have to work our way through this process to make sure that we get in the best place we can possibly get to, and a place that in fact has us on a path where we can do something about the challenges that we face. Can I take questions, or do you want me to just stop?
Probably take one question.
One question. Yes.
Where did the 135,000 come from? So the experts said that. What goes into that?
It comes from the strategic housing plan draft. That's where I took that number from. That's going to be presented to the council over the next couple weeks, and then that plan can be debated as well. I know there are a lot of people in the community that think that number is too low, and there are an equal number of people in the community who think that number is too high. So at a really rough place, I look at that and think that maybe that number is not that bad as a place for us to target.
But there wasn't a
But
study.
that's where it came from.
Or there wasn't a study that led to it or anything?
That hasn't been presented to us yet, so I don't know the extent of the study. I know there were a lot of people that worked on that plan.
Okay.
But at this point, that's the goal that is the staff's recommendation, so it's a goal I'm taking.
Thank you.
I would really appreciate everybody's willingness to roll up their sleeves and to help in this process, and I appreciate the fact that everybody is here. And I appreciate that even looking in the faces of the people in the room, that a lot of people in this room are coming from very different places, and I appreciate that as well. But a commitment to participate in good faith, to try and work through this process in a way that gets us to a good place is something that I would greatly appreciate, and so would this city.
And Mayor, we couldn't let you get out of here. Tomorrow is your birthday, and we wanted to collectively as a group wish you a happy birthday. We actually have cake that everyone can eat.
It's hard.
Thank you. Can we cut that right, pass it around?
It'll be back with the beer. Cake and beer. Everyone's favorite. There is water as well. Next, we're going to hear from Greg Guernsey, who is the director of the city's Planning and Development Review Department. Okay. He can introduce himself better than I can. You are, Greg. Thank you.
Well, I'm excited to see so many people here. I wasn't sure how many people were actually coming to the event this evening. But my name is Greg Guernsey. I'm your planning director. And the mayor did an excellent job actually giving an overview. Our last major code was our zoning ordinance that was adopted back in 1985. It took about 4 years to adopt. It was really limited to our zoning regulations that deal with height and setbacks, what uses are permitted where. It was very controversial at the time. And that code has basically followed us through time. And if you think of our development codes as like a deck of cards, we started out with 1 card, and now we're at 52. And it's getting pretty hard to go through all those at once. The code itself came out of Imagine Austin. As the mayor said, that's our comprehensive plan. It was adopted in June of 2012. And it had priority programs, dealt with water resources, our creative community. It also dealt with compact and connected, but one of those things that rose to the top was the need to update our land development code. And as the mayor said, the land development code is not just zoning, it's our watershed regulations that we deal with water quality. It's our drainage regulations about how we detain water so we're not flooding neighbors downstream. It deals with transportation issues, landscaping, signs. There's a virtual smorgasbord of things that touch our lives every day, whether you rent or you own, whether you live in a high-rise or you live in a garage apartment somewhere in Austin. It will touch you as you go to work, as you come home, as you shop. We started in 2013 when we adopted the contract to work with Opticos and Peter Park and other consultants. And we started on a journey. That journey started with the adoption of the contract, but then we started listening to the community. And there were 5 major themes that really came out from listening to the community. Those things that dealt with mobility. It was a concern back at that time. How we get around. Our code is very auto-centric, and so this tries to provide better connections, but not connections just for the automobile, but for people that are walking or taking transit, taking bicycle. It was also, and CodeNEXT won't solve all the transportation problems. We still need the bond program to help improve streets, but it will enable us to probably get to that place that's spoken of in Imagine Austin. Spoke to affordability, to try to provide more diversity of housing, to have that more distributed. Certainly, a housing problem in Austin is not going to be solved by CodeNEXT either. We're still going to probably still need state tax credits. There's still going to have to be maybe some incentives by the city through smart housing. We talk about in our code that's coming density bonus programs where you may give a developer slightly more square footage, slightly more units to get some more affordable units to actually be constructed. The environment in Austin has always been very sacred. And so talking about the environment, talking about water quality, taking care of some of the major drainage issues. We've had 2 large flooding events in 2013, 2015, that displaced many hundreds of people in Austin, and tried to lessen those impacts in the future. Water quality and having green infrastructure to take care of some of the water quality issues on site, to reuse that water is important. Community character. After we did listening community, we actually went out and did something called the Community Character Manual, We had actually boxes that went out asking folks to tell us about their neighborhoods. I think we went to like over 110, and John probably knows the specific number, neighborhoods, to get an idea of what the character was of Austin. What makes Austin Austin? What keeps us weird? What keeps all these folks coming to Austin? What brought you here? How many people actually were born in Austin? Oh, that's more than I thought. And so the essence of Austin changes so quickly. It's almost been fleeting. If you've lived here, certainly, or you've been here maybe 10 years, those things that you've seen and you've walked down Congress Avenue, or you've gone to your favorite place to go get a drink, or the places that you may have lived, a lot of that's changed. It's in 10 years. And if you go back 20 years, oh my. And if you go back 30 years, as David, I think mentioned, and we were serving this morning, I said, David moved here, and he's one of your speakers tonight on the panel. I think he moved here in 70, there was 250,000 people. When I moved to Austin, we were about 340,000 people back in the 80s. And now we're over about 900,000. So we've changed a lot. We've had 4% growth, I think, the last about 4 or 5 years, and we slowed down a little bit to 2.5, but that's like catching your breath. But of those other things, so community character was important neighborhood character. There's things that deal with what's called compatibility standards, about how buildings speak to each other, uses speak to each other. Something called our mansion regulations, a residential design standard, because there are concerns that neighborhoods that express the houses that were built too big. We have commercial design standards that are also part of that character, about how we interface, how we get to the buildings where we work or we shop, where the parking is located. So that was part of it. And the other part was processing of permits. How do I get a permit? If you filed for a building permit, it's not the greatest thing in Austin. It's actually improved quite a bit from maybe it was about a year or two ago. But that was important, because the more time it takes to go build a unit, to go occupy a space, that cost for that small business in particular, or the homeowner, there's carrying charges that they're waiting for that house to be finished or that tenant space to be done. So those 5 things that really came out. There was a code diagnosis that was done as well, talking about the deficiencies, and I'll let John will talk a little bit about that. And while amongst of all the different things that are happening, we also had a change in our government. We went from an at-large council of 7 to a district representation of 10 council members and the mayor. And that took some time for our council, I think, to understand, and for the public to be involved. And so we had an educational process, I'll call it. We had the prescription papers where we brought these issues up and introduced them to the Code Advisor Group, which I see a couple members here in the audience, to the commissions, and to the public about issues of trade-offs. Because not everything can be done automatically by a single code, but what those important things are. So those dealt with fiscal responsibility, affordability, the built environment, the natural environment, and talking about those things. Housing was one that we spent quite a bit of time on. So that's what kind of brings us here. My department is the lead department, but we're certainly not the only department involved. Our watershed protection department actually authored sections of the code that dealt with the drainage parts and water quality. We're working with neighborhood housing on the housing sections, and our transportation department on those sections, and we're working collaboratively with our consultants. Our consultants have brought in the best techniques that are used outside of our community to Austin, and I'll let John talk about those now. So I have Peter Park here. Peter was the director of planning in Milwaukee and Denver before he came to Austin. And they went through code rewrites in those cities, and he survived, so I'm confident I'll survive. John Mickey works for Opticoast, and they're one of the leading companies in the United States that deal with land development codes and rewrites of them. So I'll turn it over to John. And thank you again for coming. I'm really excited that you're all here. If you look at austintexas.gov CodeNEXT, there's ways that you'll find about meetings. We have some high school meetings that are taking place on Saturdays, which are called Code Talks. It kind of gives you an introduction. They're free. You can come, get some bling if you show up. We're going to have mapping meetings, 10 of those, one in each of the 10 council districts, and we're working through our council offices. You'll see those probably starting after that Independence date in April 18th, and probably going through the month of May and partly into June. And then we'll have Code Talk meetings, and the first one actually starts next Wednesday on the environment, but those will be going through the end of May too. So go check us out at CodeNEXT at our website, and you'll find out more about that, how to comment section by section, line by line of the code, if you want to drill down to that, or an overview survey as well. So John?
Thank you, Greg. So I wanted to ask a quick question in the room, just to get a sense of the room. How many people in the room are software engineers? Right. Software engineers. Right. How many of you are small businesses or work for a small business? How many of you run a business from your house? Okay, so there's a good mix in the crowd. So I ask these questions for a couple reasons, because I have all kinds of analogies. I won't bring up the analogy about cameras, but one of the principals of my firm, Dan Perot, has used that many times. But I will bring up a different analogy. When your last code had a major update, I won't tell you how old I was, but I was using a Commodore 64 at that time. I don't know how many of you have ever used a Commodore 64. It had a wonderful screen. It had two colors. You had black and green. I don't know why they chose black and green, but you had black and green. It was great. And why do I bring that up, right? Because your code was written around that same time, right? The first computer that I really started to use was DOS-based. How many of you have ever used a computer with DOS? How many of you, and this is probably the software engineers, know what a terminal is and still use terminal? All right. So understand that your code, when it was written, it was at a time when it was using best practices at the time. But it has been, could you imagine a world in which your interface was still just the terminal and you've just patched over the last 30 years, 200x? So, I mean, I'll tell you, most of the days I'm not in front of the computer anymore. I'm using this, right? And Dan usually pulls this one out to talk about the fact that he doesn't use a Polaroid camera anymore, right? To send pictures. And it's really important, meetings like this, meetings that we've had going out to folks. I'm really thankful for the Austin Tech Alliance for hosting this event. These are important conversations. But I bring up the analogy of the computer to recognize that we are no longer really a nation that necessarily goes out to a lot of public meetings. So it's great to see everyone here. We see the tweets. We see on Facebook that there are groups that are talking about this code and having some really great in-depth discussions. And the one thing that I will say is the mayor and Greg have done a great job talking about why is this important. And this code impacts your life in where you live, how you get around, where you work, all of these things. Flood, trees, parks and open space. But if we aren't having these conversations to talk about what is it that's important to me or you, and having those conversations with a diverse group, and you will have a diverse panel in front of you, we can talk about what are those things that are in common. We have heard things from very diverse groups that have common themes that development community, businesses, neighborhood groups, they want predictability. They want to understand that when the code says something, that's what we're getting, right? They don't want surprises. No one likes a last-second surprise. We heard very clearly, whether it's a developer or a neighborhood, right? They want to know what is the path forward. And Imagine Austin does a great job of setting that path, right? Where are we as a community trying to go? Neighborhood plans do a great job at a really fine-grained level saying, where do we want to go? And I will tell you, in our work, we found that those two things are actually much closer aligned than maybe you may have heard in the public. There are areas where there will be discussions, right? But they are closer in line. And I think these kinds of meetings are great. They are an opportunity to talk about these ideas, really have in-depth conversations. So that was one thing I want to talk about. Again, that we have this wonderful event, that there's this opportunity to talk, that we encourage all of you to stay involved, because
The code is bringing best practice about making it easier to understand what's going on in land development code. So I talked about DOS and the terminal. I mean, the land development code and what we're presenting right now, and what's out as the first draft, it is reorganizing the way that information is presented. And it's like that magic that happened when the Macintosh came out and the graphical user interface was given to everyone. And then Windows came out. And now that same kind of ideas of thinking about the user is on everything from your phone to your tablet to your computer. That's part of it, right? But what we recognize is as we've done this update, you have 30 years of hard work in figuring out what are the issues important to you as a community, whether it be trees, whether it be about the SOS in Barton Springs and protecting the drinking water in your community, whether it's your neighborhood plans. Well, as we move forward to this new interface, right, where it's easier to navigate, it's easier to find your information, we have to respect the fact that you have 30 years of really, really important work that was done. And so a lot of that has been carried forward. Some of it's been cleaned up, some of it's been integrated. So a lot of our effort in this project has been both about bringing best practice to the city of Austin, but also about taking all of this hard work that's already been done and bringing it forward. With that, I'd like to ask Peter Park to come up a little bit about, continue about kind of where we're going from here.
Thanks, John. Hi, everyone. So I'm here to tell you that, yes, it's out of date, definitely, your operating system now. I would suggest to you that it's actually kind of broken, right? In other words, to get the city that you want requires the most amount of effort on the part of your elected officials, your citizen boards and commissions that deal with development in the city. It's an arduous process. And that's a lot of what this work is about, is fixing a broken system. Now you get there, you finally get to certain outcomes with regard to development decisions, but it takes a long time. And time is money. And time has to be, that money has to be recaptured somewhere, in the cost of housing, in the cost of doing business, in the cost of money and the risk associated. So there is an imperative and an urgency to get this work done. There's an economic urgency to get this done. Because again, the effect that your current processes and getting development that you want, the process today is really expensive, and it makes it difficult for businesses to succeed. It makes it difficult for housing and living in Austin to be and remain affordable. There's an environmental imperative. You have very precious natural resources in your city, the watershed. You have a growing population, and you have a very auto-oriented still city. And so the environment in terms of air quality, the environment in terms of protecting and preserving, enhancing, improving the condition of your watershed is a major imperative in what this work is about. And there's a social equity imperative to this. As affordability becomes a more significant challenge in the city, and it's an opportunity to better distribute opportunities for everyone in your community. And if there's anything that we've learned in your city is there's a lot of care. There's a lot of heart in this city. You care a lot about each other. Right now, in your code system and the way this system operates, it's a good thing you care that much, because it allows you to endure a lot of unnecessary steps to get the city that you want. So I can tell you that as the planning director, former planning director in Denver, we did exactly the same thing that you are doing here, and it worked. It works significantly better than the old system. And so, as the mayor said, right, the first map when it comes out, he said it was going to be wrong. I would suggest it's going to be incomplete. It's not going to be perfect, right? It's not going to be totally wrong. But it's going to require a lot of conversations to make it the best code and the best map that Austin will have. But that also means that everyone needs to be willing to consider changing the way you understand the world today. There's a lot of processes, there's a lot of things that people understand about your code today, that people rely on because they're familiar with it, they're used to it. But as John mentioned, in terms of best practice, there are also the things that are preventing you from getting the city that you aspire to. So there's a lot of change that this code presents. And if you don't really know what it is today, you kind of don't know what's broken, and that's fine. But, you know, without a willingness to change, without a willingness to see things differently, to consider things constructively, it's gonna be an even more difficult time to get this project done. So we want you to participate. We hope you'll participate in every way that you can. But if anything, please be the advocates of innovation. Be the advocates of change and improvement. Not change for the sake of change, but change that points to and delivers greater improvement to your city. So as the mayor mentioned, the code is out now. The map will be coming out in the middle of April. That map, as we keep talking about it, it is the place that we have the opportunity to better understand the draft of the code. Right? It's the place that the code is going to prove itself, that it's going to in fact deliver the city that you want. And so it's absolutely critical that when that map comes out, we hope that as many of you, everyone, get involved, take a look at it, understand it, talk about it, and share your thoughts. And if you find something really good, tell people about it, talk about it. Talk about the imperative of getting this thing done, because the city council needs to hear from everyone on it. Thanks.
Hey folks, my name is Mike Kane and I publish the Austin Monitor here in Austin, Texas. I can happy to talk to any of you about us and what we do if you don't know who we are. But now I'm going to invite our panel to come up in the interest of time. We'll keep this pretty speedy, and we'll have these folks in turn introduce themselves, and then we'll move forward. And we're missing a John Michael. So John Michael, if you want to start and just sort of introduce yourself, tell us who you are, and I think I'll take a cue from the mayor, and I'll ask you all to tell us if you are indeed scared of CodeNEXT. So John Michael, I know that's probably not the best question for you, but go ahead.
I'm John Michael Cortez. I work with Mayor Adler, focus mainly on land use and transportation issues and a number of other things. Am I scared of CodeNEXT? No, I'm actually very excited about CodeNEXT, and I'm anxious to get through this process so that we can use the tools that CodeNEXT will offer us to achieve that vision and Imagine Austin. So I'm far from scared. I'm anxious and excited.
Great. You're on.
Hi, I'm Niran Babalola. I'm a member of AURA, and we are a land use and transportation advocacy group. We're a grassroots group run by our members, and you should join. I am not afraid of CodeNEXT. I think CodeNEXT is a great opportunity for Austinites to learn what makes Austin Austin, what influences the outcomes that we see in our city. Because so many people are seeing that the city is becoming a place that does not work for everyone. It does not work for the artists and the dreamers. It does not work for the makers and the doers that make Austin Austin. And if we can't come together and find a way to let people be closer to the places they want to live, if we can't find a way to let people live where they want, then we're not going to have the Austin that we want.
I couldn't say it better than they're on, so I'm just not going to answer that question. My name is Andy Gunthu. I'm the Regional Mobility Director at the Austin Chamber of Commerce. I'm also an advisor to Evolve Austin Partners, which is an umbrella organization of 18 civic-minded organizations who are united in their support for realizing the vision and the promise of the Imagine Austin Comprehensive Plan.
Thank you. My name is David King, and I'm a member of the Zoning and Planning Commission, although my comments tonight are not reflective of that commission. They're just my comments personally. And I'm the former president of the Austin Neighborhoods Council. And I'm not afraid of CodeNEXT. You know, I think it is time for us to replace the code that we have today. And I'm really glad to see a broad diversity of people getting involved. You know, when I moved to Austin, you know, my career is in software development, so I really love being here in this facility here, creative minds, people trying to solve problems and produce that next app that makes a big difference in our lives, and maybe solve some of the problems that we're talking about here today. So I look at it from that lens too, and the opportunity that we have. And so I'm glad that you're here, because I really, as I look back on my own career, I always thought about that I want to make our community better. I want to make our world better. And I think my work will help us do that in its small way. And I think that in the IT world, we all kind of have that, many of us have that same perspective. So I think it's great that we're tapping in, that you all are stepping up and saying that you want to be involved and that you want to have a say in what happens.
And with that, because we are a little short on time, I want to turn it over to y'all, and if anybody out there has a question, please raise your hand. I got a bunch in my head, but we'll start with you because I saw your hand first.
So UT Austin is as part of the city. How does CodeNEXT matter to the students there and the faculty there?
John Michael, let's start with you because you're working on the policy side.
Well, I would say, as was mentioned earlier, CodeNEXT, whether they know it or not, in our land development code, whether they know it or not, impacts everybody. Specifically with students, students are struggling with our affordability challenges. Many students, not all, are struggling with the affordability challenges in this community just as much, if not more, than anyone else. I was a student at the University of Texas, and I struggled with affordability then, and I can imagine what students are dealing with now. And then also transportation challenges, getting around, getting to and from campus. Now we've made some changes over the last decade, I think, of which we should be very proud, with creating opportunities for more students and people who need to be at the university, the opportunity to live closer to the university, so they don't have to worry about how to get there, they can just walk. And I think actually what we did in West Campus is a good example of why we need a new land development code. If you look at what we achieved through the university neighborhood overlay, which is the changes which enabled a lot of what's happened over the last decade or so in West Campus. And if you look at some of the other good development that we've had in other places in the city, in our transit-oriented development districts, in Mueller, in the North Burnett Gateway where the domain is, in almost all of those instances, a lot of what you see there is illegal under our current code. You couldn't just go and do that if you own that land. In almost every instance, we had to write what's called a regulating plan in many cases. We had to basically write a whole new land development code that applied to a specific area because our current code doesn't give us the tools to achieve the kind of development that results in the kind of outcomes that we'd like to see in our community. So, I think that some of the positive things we've seen happen with regard to land use near the university, CodeNEXT will allow us, maybe not to that scale, and because it's not appropriate in every place, it will allow us to actually achieve those because we'll now have the tools to be able to do that. So I would say, and because students live in all parts of the city and struggle with affordability and mobility and access to the things they need to lead their daily lives, just like anybody else, CodeNEXT very much impacts them in every single way.
David, if I could, you're a zoning and planning commissioner, and you deal with interpretations of code and how that all works in the city. I sort of want to get you to respond a little bit to John Michael's statement. Do you think that do you think that we don't have the tools, I guess, to do what we need to do with the current code?
Well, I agree, we don't have all the tools we need. It does have some of the tools, and those will be carried forward, but we have more tools in our toolkit that we can then apply and really address some of these problems and needs that we have in our community.
Okay. Niran, Andy, you want to weigh in on?
Sure, I think UT students have an interesting perspective on affordability in the city. If you just take a look at our UT shuttle map, you can see the effects that our land use code has on affordability. Look at where those lines go. They go to clusters of apartment buildings that we've allowed to be built there that we don't allow anywhere else. If you look at Far West, if you look at Riverside, those are places where we created affordability with our laws that we don't allow in other places. And as the city has grown, fewer and fewer places remain affordable. And there's this fight against allowing homes for people in the places that they want to live. We know how to make Austin work for more people. The answer is to let people live where they want by making it legal to build homes for them. But so many people who care about affordability, who care about making sure that everyone has access to a good quality of life, that everyone has access to a home, don't know that there's this layer beneath all the buildings that they see as they walk from place to place in the city that really determines what gets to be built here. If we want to get an affordable city, more people have to get involved, more than people who already have a home for themselves and want to protect their quality of life, which is an important concern, but also people who don't have a home of their own yet. People who want to be able to put down roots in Austin, Texas and raise their families here, who don't see a way that that's ever gonna happen if we stay on the course we are today.
Andy?
Yeah, I think Naren touched on sort of the mobility aspects, which I think are important to mention because you know, it's not a coincidence that the places in our city that are best served by transit are the places that are most dense. They go hand in hand. You can't, people often lament, you know, why doesn't Austin have a more, you know, well-developed, robust transit system? And it's because you need a built environment that's sufficiently dense to be able to operate and maintain those systems over the long term. And you need riders to be able to, you know, walk or bike, or in some cases, you know, drive for park and rides to those facilities. And so, you know, it's a sort of chicken or the egg scenario. And we need to understand that, you know, yes, to have that investment, that infrastructure investment, now would be great, but we need to lay the groundwork right now by increasing the density and the capacity of our neighborhoods.
Okay. Who else out there has a question? Yes, ma'am, please.
I'm wondering if somebody can address all of the multiple plans going on right now between CodeNEXT, and we have a strategic mobility plan and Connection 2020, and I'm teeing this up for you, John Michael. You know, how those are all related and the timing of all of those, in addition to CodeNEXT.
Well, I don't know that there was really a lot of planning about all that, about the timing for all that planning. You know, you're right, there's a lot going on. And as a planner, I'm excited. You know, I think we should always be planning, and we should have a lot of different plans. But I think that they should all inform each other. You know, and you know, in my mind, planning is a very iterative process, and the planning that we're doing should react to the other plans that we have on the books, and then the next plan should react to those plans, and then the next plan, and all of those things should inform each other. I am excited though, because a lot of the things that are going on right now with regard to planning, you know, they all seem to be headed in the right direction. You know, we have a comprehensive plan that is informing, it's been on the books for a few years, so it's informing things like the strategic housing plan, it's informing things like the strategic mobility plan, it's informing things like the service plan that Capital Metro just adopted. It's informing things like Project Connect, the high capacity transit plan that Capital Metro is pushing forward. It should be informing all of our planning efforts. And so, you know, the timing, you know, I think, you know, I've sat in my office sometimes and gosh, I wish we were already done with this plan, a particular plan, so that we could, you know, use the outcome of that to inform the next plan. But, you know, they'll all talk to each other, and they all seem to be moving in the right direction, and I'm really excited about it, all of it.
If I could, you know, one of the things, John Michael, that I've heard the mayor say is, you know, we're a city of plans on shelves, right? How do we, I think to tack on to the end of that question, how do we make sure that what we're thinking about now, what we're planning now, is actually going to be implemented? And if you could offer advice to those present about how they could get involved in making sure that all that happens.
Well, certainly hold people accountable. Don't let the plan sit on the shelf. You know, and I think that, quite frankly, that's what CodeNEXT really is. It's an implementation. Our plan is Imagine Austin, and CodeNEXT is taking that plan off the shelf and changing our land development code so that we have the tools to actually make that plan real and to implement it. And so when we have an opportunity like CodeNEXT, or when we have an opportunity like the mobility bond that passed last year, I mean, that's what we have to do. Those are the kinds of things we have to support. We have to have the will to actually marshal the resources and the political will to implement the plans that are on the shelf. And so I would suggest that you know, if people are interested in actually implementing our plans, then you have to hold Us as staff people, us as elected officials or commissioners, you have to hold us all accountable to say, look, we've got a plan, we like it, it's the right way to go. Now let's take the next step and actually implement the thing. And supporting CodeNEXT as a process is one way to do that.
Thank you. I think Niran, Andy, and David, you've all in some kind of way had an experience trying to hold policymakers in the city accountable. I wonder if you'd share some your experiences quickly with that and offer advice to these folks here about what they can do to get involved, and also sort of give it a tech bent. What is the importance of technology being involved in all this?
So one thing that I've noticed the more and more I interact with our city government is that like it doesn't really matter whether you're right or wrong. It matters if whoever you're trying to convince is going to get the votes for doing what you want to do. And at the end of the day, if you, I don't know how many of you rent your home right now? All right, it's about half. So if most renters do not vote in municipal elections, and if they do vote, they're not necessarily informed about the issues enough to be able to say, I'm gonna vote for this person, because they're gonna make sure I can afford to buy a home in Austin, Texas. To be able to credibly build a movement for people to afford homes, it's gonna take people actually getting involved, people who aren't the traditional people who are showing up to these city meetings. And if you go to one and you look around, I like all the people who I see in meetings, but the crowd does not look like this. It's a different crowd. They're good people. They're great. But influencing people, influencing decision makers, you need numbers and you need people who are going to reliably vote. So get your friends, make sure they know what's going on, make sure they're emailing their council members, make sure they're voting, because you can tell it's information that's public. So vote and tell your friends.
I don't know if I can give this a tech bent because I'm the least technologically savvy millennial that I know. But I think if we think about innovation, we are trying to innovate the city through the land development code process. And part of that is sort of challenging assumptions that are raised in public discussions. I think one of those that is critical to start challenging is this notion of what is neighborhood character, and what does that mean to people? Because it's a term that gets thrown around a lot. To me, to most people, I think we assume that it refers to sort of the aesthetic quality of neighborhoods. Keeping a single family, large lot neighborhood, a single family large lot neighborhood in perpetuity. I grew up in a single family large lot neighborhood right off South Congress. I live around the corner from my parents in the house that my grandparents lived in. To me, character refers to, the people that I grew up with, or my former neighbors who are no longer able to, live in those neighborhoods, in my neighborhood or on my block, because they've been priced out of it. So to me, maintaining neighborhood character actually requires us to change the built environment dramatically so that my friends and my neighbors who I've lost can afford to come back.
Okay, David.
So, from an IT perspective, I think there are lots of opportunities to facilitate engagement. I agree that we need to get engaged and hear voices that aren't normally heard, and vote. I think that's really important. And I think if we do those things and that we can make a difference, and your perspective can be reflected in the policy decisions. And so I would just encourage you to really get involved. And I know one of the strategies that's being looked at right now is to have let folks provide testimony remotely through and I hope that we can grow that and allow folks to more easily interact with their elected officials and without having to drive anywhere, that you can do it from your home. I'm hopeful that one day we can do that. And that you can vote online to make it easier for you to vote. And see, those are IT things, and I know those problems have already been nailed in terms of making sure that it's reliable and it's safe and it's it can't be tampered with, things like that. So I hope that we can do more of that, and that way we can have a broader range of voices heard, and I think that would be reflected in our policies as well.
Before we move on, I want to get a sense of the room. How many people here feel like they have a pretty good grasp of what CodeNEXT is? That's pretty impressive. I guess I was prepared to ask these guys to each give a sort of quick, sort of briefing on what they think it is. But I think instead, because I think we do have a room that's relatively familiar with it, I'll ask for you to each sort of share what you are looking for when the code comes back, when the maps come out. I should say the code's already out. What are you looking for? What would make you comfortable? What's your perspective there? Go ahead, David.
Well, I think that we need a good range of tools in the toolkit so that we can apply them in ways that will help us in these problems we've discussed today and the future that we see for our city. So I think that's the first step, is to have a robust toolkit, and I think that's what, ultimately that's what we're doing right now, is putting that toolkit together. But then it's how we apply those tools. That's really where we can address some of these problems we've discussed of equity or inequity and opportunity and diversity and inclusiveness. And that's why I think if you get involved and vote, you can affect those kinds of policies. So once we have a good, robust toolkit, then we can go forward and say, now let's apply this in a way that's equitable, that's fair, that provides opportunity, inclusive, and helps us address affordability. Because I see this, where we're at right now, I roll back, I don't want to tell you my age, but a few decades when I first got started in my IT career. And I wish I had had this kind of opportunity to go and learn and work together with other folks that are trying to solve problems and create opportunities. But fortunately ACC was here, so I went and took some classes, and then from there. But that gave me the career. I lived what we call the American dream, because I got my degree, I got my training, and then I got a job in IT. And so that's a good paying job, and I'm fortunate that I had that, but we have many people who don't have those kinds of opportunities, and that we can solve those problems too if we provide more opportunities like this. Why can't we have these kinds of facilities in other parts of our city where we can have folks that don't have to travel so far, they can go, or help them do that in their own homes where they have broadband and tools to do this with. So I think we have, this is a lot of opportunity if we have a good, robust toolkit, and if you get involved and vote.
To sort of bring it full circle, I think, to reference your first question about change, my hope through the CodeNEXT process is that people like you, who hopefully do get more engaged, and those who already are, and everyone in the community start to feel a lot more comfortable with the idea of change, and don't see change as this sort of boogeyman that we need to be resistant to. I think being able, through this process, to sort of describe to people on a really human level how they stand to benefit. And a lot of that, again, I'm being repetitive, is just challenging sort of commonly held assumptions. For instance, a lot of people are scared that, their neighbor's bungalow is going to get torn down to, build a 30-story high-rise. That's not realistic, but it's based on the assumption that, density is this binary, that there's only, single-family large lot houses on one end and downtown high-rises on the other. But if people can see how we can, incorporate context-sensitive, gentle density through, duplexes or smaller lots, or accessory dwelling units, that's the way that I think people can get more comfortable with this idea of change. We can actually have a productive conversation.
So when it comes to the code and these maps, what I'm looking for is a code and maps that affirmatively further fair housing. So the Fair Housing Act, as you guys might be aware, is a law that kind of requires us to eliminate barriers to fair housing choice. If you want to live in a certain place, your landlord, your government, they should not put up barriers that affect you based on a set of protected classes. For instance, race, national origin, disability status, etc. So this is a law that we've had on the books for 49 years, but we haven't actually truly enforced it. The Fair Housing Act requires governments to affirmatively further fair housing. It's a recognition that if you don't actually take steps to go above and beyond to say, hey guys, we're definitely not gonna segregate, then if you don't do that, you're probably just still gonna segregate. There's so many ways to do it, and such a pent up desire to do it, even though people aren't really bad. It's not that people are all racist. It's just that our tendency is to continue along this path that we've been on for so long. So our policies kind of have that baked in. If you look at a map of the distribution of people in Austin, it's segregated. We're the only growing city with a shrinking black population. We are the #1 most economically segregated city in the country. And what that means is that the people with more wealth live in very different places from people with less wealth. That is not something that just happened. That is something that our laws cause. At the end of the day, what zoning is, to a large extent, is segregation. That's kind of a controversial thing to say, but that's what it is. It's to keep people who are different from each other in different places. And one of the tools that you can use to do that is low density zoning, which is what we did throughout the city. What that means is that if you have a big house with a big yard, if somebody could build like a smaller house with a smaller yard next door, then that would cost less money. And somebody with less money could be your neighbor. So instead, if you just make that illegal, then your neighbor has to be just as rich as you, and someone with less money has to go to the next neighborhood, or to the next neighborhood, or across the 130 tollway, where the only places that there is with affordable housing these days. Like, this is a thing that we designed, and we can undesign it. People are blaming the tech industry for the problems that we're seeing with affordability, as if having people who are coming in and creating things is something that we should want to stop, that we should have less jobs, that our economy has won so much that we're tired of winning. Like, instead, what we need to decide to do is to have inclusive neighborhoods. That if somebody wants to live in a certain neighborhood, that we've done everything we can to let them live there. That we've allowed enough homes, that if people can't afford it still, that we've put the subsidies in place to make that happen. That is who we should be. We should be a city where the kinds of people who live in a neighborhood aren't determined by how much money they make or what kind of job they have. But where who lives in a neighborhood is defined by what kind of people chose to live there. Maybe runners choose to live in neighborhoods near the lake so they can go on runs. Maybe actors choose to live in the neighborhoods around their theaters so it's more convenient for them. And communities in general could pick neighborhoods that they would want to live in to be close to each other. That's the kind of Austin we can be. All we have to do is choose it, all we have to do is get involved, and all we have to do is demand it, because it's the Austin we deserve.
Before you pass that mic, before you pass the mic, I sort of want to press you on one thing. Is it overly simple to suggest that what you just said is that single-family housing is racist?
Yeah, that's.
Okay. Do you want? I guess I heard that, so please correct me.
So I don't think single-family zoning is racist. I grew up in a single-family home. It's single-family zoned. So when this whole racist thing comes up, everybody gets real uncomfortable. It's not. This problem isn't about individual people hating black people. I don't think there are that many people who are like that. But when we embrace policies that have outcomes that disproportionately affect other people, we put laws in place to stop that. Like, literally last year, the Justice Department said, if you use low density zoning everywhere and it has a disproportionate effect on people of a particular race, then that probably violates the Fair Housing Act. Like, we, the city of Austin, are probably violating the Fair Housing Act. And who is talking about that? Like, this is a problem. we should fix it.
Thank you. John Michael, you want to respond to, I guess, feel free to answer the first question, which is?
What you're gonna have to remind me is, like, is it, what did I want to see out of CodeNEXT? Is
Well,
that
yeah, but also, I'd love to hear your response as a Mayor
that's-
Stafford to what you've heard here.
Okay, well, I'll start with the first question. What I'd very much like to see out of CodeNEXT, just to oversimplify it, are three things. Number one, setting aside all the different policies, and we've talked a lot about housing, and we've talked a lot about density and neighborhood character, but there's a whole lot of other stuff in CodeNEXT. There's how we handle stormwater, there's how we handle parking, there's, as Greg mentioned, there's, some people like billboards, some people don't. All that stuff is in the code. I mean, there's dozens and dozens of things that impact you beyond just housing and density that are in the code. So don't think it's just about this housing and density versus not issue, although that seems to be what most folks are talking about right now, which is understandable. But setting aside all of those issues, the first thing that I want out of this CodeNEXT process is a code that is that is and leads to a process that's easier, that's clear, that's more predictable, that's more reliable, whether you're building a downtown high-rise or whether you're adding a bathroom or building a single-family home, that is just a better code to use. I would like to make Greg Guernsey's life easier. That's really goal number one in Rodney Gonzalez's life, who does our development services and permitting and all that. I would like to make his life easier, irrespective of the process. So, the policies in the code. So it just needs to be a better code, period. And by the way, that's a low bar, as you've heard. The second thing that I'd like to see out of this process is, as the mayor said, I would like to see a code and the map associated with it that realistically allows the city of Austin, within the city of Austin, to accommodate another 135,000 additional housing units, accessible at all ranges of income, at all different kinds of densities and in all different kinds of appropriate places throughout the city. I'd like to see that actually be a realistic outcome of the new code and the new map. And there's a lot baked into that, but at a high level, that's what I'd like to see second. And the third thing is really more general. I would like to see a code that facilitates this community getting to the vision and the outcomes that we, as a community, have said we want, that is enshrined in the Imagine Austin Comprehensive Plan. At a high level, those are the three things I want. Now, there's a lot of discussion and debate and detail under each one of those things, but if we hit and make progress on those large goals at the end of this whole CodeNEXT endeavor, I will feel really good about the process. Now, with respect to what Niran said, just my reaction to that is like, well, hell yeah, right? I think we all need to acknowledge that zoning has been used in many communities, and undoubtedly this one, as a tool to exclude people. And that exclusion is based on lots of things: race, income, class, whatever you want to say. It was used to do those things. That being said, in my mind, zoning is a tool, right? And just like any tool, you can use it for good things and you can use it for bad things. Zoning, my recollection from a long time ago, initially, I'm sure there was some exclusion intended from it, but it was really about separating not necessarily people, but uses. People didn't want to live next to a factory. People thought that probably wasn't safe. So it was about separating uses, but of course, like any tool, any policy, it can be used if it's in the hands of the wrong people with the wrong intent for bad outcomes. So I think this is an opportunity in rewriting our land development code to use this tool, zoning, to use our site development standards, to use all the laws governing what gets built where and how and by whom, to use it for ends that are inclusionary, to use it for ends that are progressive, to use it for ends that result in a sustainable community, a compact and connected community, a healthy community, a prosperous community, a diverse community. We can actually use the tool for good, and we'll never be able to necessarily go back and right all the wrongs, but we can use this tool to start making progress towards righting wrongs and achieve some other things while we're at it. So I also agree that single-family zoning in and of itself isn't racist. I also grew up here in Austin in a single-family home, and I live in one now, and I love it. And I would say this, is that in my mind, again, zoning can be used for nefarious aims, but what truly is racist and what truly is unfair is that that there are not enough people of color or other traditionally disenfranchised populations that can actually afford to make that choice. I would not want to take away the opportunity if people prefer to live in a single family home to be able to do that. I think that more people should be able to make that choice. And right now, the way that our system is set up, not enough people have that opportunity. And we need to create other kinds of housing and other kinds of opportunities in certain neighborhoods. But I don't think we take the opportunity to live in a single family home. We just need to make that opportunity broader, and we need to create other kinds of opportunities, because some people will choose not to live in that kind of housing. We need to broaden the resources that people have so they can make the choices that best suit their ends.
All right, thank you, sir. We're right up against the 7 o'clock time. I know you get, looks like we have 3 other questions. I know David's got to get out of here. I've got to get out of here. I apologize. I think some of these folks will be around to talk to you afterward. Thank you all so much for being here. It's been great.
All right, man. This is a panel with, you're from Austin, right?
I was born here. I didn't actually grow up.
Oh, okay. So there's 3 native Austinites on the panel. You don't see that very often.
I'm not the tech guy. What are you doing?
I don't know. I'm just handing you. Just handing you. My name is Niran. Niran. Nice to meet you.
I have to come and give you a hug and say it's so good to see you. You're like, I don't even know who you are because I kept my hair in a But I was about to say, like, knowing that you moved to Austin not that long ago, and to know how involved and informed you are and active, it makes me so proud. And I don't know if you're still, are you and your girlfriend still together? No. That makes me kind of sad, but it makes me happy. And I had a question for you. It was like, when you
There you go.
Thanks. Yeah, thank you so much.
You bet.
looking at it from fresh,
Yeah, thanks for
what would you say?
jumping up in there.
It's like opportunities go like surprisingly, man. Like besides like the traffic and
So negative surprises or positive?
both, like top 3.
So first, the positives about it. Like there's so many communities here. They're doing great things together, and people are excited about showing you how to do those great things. Like this is a city that truly changed my life. Like I was actually, I think I was working here trying to get a startup idea off the ground when I went basically 2 blocks away to the Hideout Theater, took some improv classes, and followed through with this crazy idea that some nerdy upper kid could get up on stage in front of people and make them laugh. And I've never been that kind of person. It's just like you bump into people who are like, hey, you should try this thing. And I'm like, well, okay. And then someone's gonna pull you in and show you and make sure you follow through. And just, there's communities like that all over. That's what Capital Factory is when it comes to technology. There's so many communities that are doing great things. And I think that's really what makes it. Negative surprises. People like are out of touch.
Oh yeah. I think that besides generation, like yeah, I think it has to do with English. I don't know if it's still in downtown.
I'm on Riverside.
It is, and I know this from back when you first moved to Cameron. Like, you know, it's one of those things where I saw it and it came from it didn't come from me